Okay. Good evening. Tonight we have Angie Davis, who is a recruiter and recruits technical content developers for software development and life sciences companies. He is a former software industry technical writer himself and has a reputation for both understanding and championing the role of content development. He recruits technical writers, technical trainers, courseware developers, instructional designers, and technical content writers for challenging staff and contract roles. Andrew enjoys helping those who communicate complex information get ahead by recognizing and refining their value to technology companies and life science companies. He's candid, connected, and just as importantly, he likes to help tech industry workers gain their independence and operate without intermediaries. So tonight, Andrew's going to present. I think he's going to just give a general overview of the current market, and then it's a Q&A. So whatever questions people have, we'll ask him about them.
Thank you, Rose. Thank you for the opportunity to present, and thank you for being flexible with respect to the topic. I couldn't help myself. I wrote some speaker's notes. So in the chat, I added the Google Drive link. Recommend you grab that file so that you can see what I'm seeing, or you can stare at my screen. Let's bring that up here. Okay. Share screen. All right. So forgive me, this is 20-year-old Microsoft Word. But why update it if it doesn't have to be updated? To supplement what you heard in my intro, I'm an independent recruiter, and you've likely interacted with other kinds of recruiters, agency recruiters who work for third-party firms that pretend to understand what tech writers are, but are fairly generalist in their focus, and in-house agencies. I'm not one of those. I'm a former tech writer who recruits only technical communicators. Typically work with startups, mostly because they're the people who can find a role for me, and larger companies tend to consider me unwelcome competition for their in-house recruiters. That the startups tend to be more motivated to get solutions more quickly, and they tend to be receptive when I say, hey, that job description that you and 20 of your best buddies put together is very unrealistic. Have you ever met someone like that? No, we haven't, but we want someone like that. I said, can you have any idea what that person costs? No, we have no idea. Well, probably makes more than your CEO if they wanted to be a tech writer at all. How about we get realistic? And from there, the job description becomes achievable. What you often see on job boards can most charitably be described as unachievable and rare, to the point of why would anybody with these skills want to be a documentation person? Anyway, also important to note, I work on a contingency basis. That means I don't get paid until a company hires the candidate I introduce. If that's a salaried job, I introduce that person with a guarantee that they will perform and be compatible with the company's needs. That guarantee is a minimum of 3 months. If they determine the person is incompatible or not working out for some other reason, I surrender my fee. So it's important that I get it right. When I place contractors, I can be more flexible than most agency recruiters. I can payroll them on a W-2 basis. I can provide employment benefits, and I can arrange for them to work corp to corp, which used to be a big thing and is now extremely rare. So they can work corp to corp with my company, or they can work corp to corp with a client. I trust them to behave, and what I can't do these days is work on a 1099 independent contractor basis with them, mostly because Franchise Tax Board and IRS have kind of tightened the screws on independent contractor work, and they've determined that anything a contractor creates that could be considered part of the final product needs to have been created by a salaried employee, and they will come back and say, hey, you think you're a contractor, we think you're a staff employee, we're disallowing the contractor benefits that you claimed, and we're going to penalize you for unpaid payroll taxes. So I don't do 1099, don't think anybody does, or if they do, they shouldn't. Um, that's how I operate. In this kind of set of speaker's notes, I put together a list of categories. I hope you all have at least one stumper of a question for me that I address, and hope we will address as a group. First, resumes, portfolios, interviewing, negotiating.
Hey, Andrew,
Excuse
if I
me?
could make a quick suggestion, if you go into, I think it's on the view menu, you can turn off the show formatting so we don't see all the paragraph marks and
Sure.
is it there? No, it's not there.
Oh, I can make it go
This
away.
is old enough, it's not where it is now, and now it's on the regular menu. Uh, Insert format. Well, if it's not an easy thing, I thought it would just, the symbol usually looks like the paragraph mark.
Yeah, I know what you're asking. Sorry, I kind of don't even see them anymore.
Every version of Word, they move stuff around. Tool, maybe under tools
Possibly.
or format.
So someone look it up. This is Word 2003.
Might be
Um,
under.
anyway,
Oh,
I,
that's
I've
Try options,
No, it's not option.
format, option.
format. No,
Oh, no, view options.
do you see an option?
I saw one, or maybe tools has it.
Oh.
Try tools, options.
Okay. You don't like these, and you
oh,
don't like
no,
paragraph
it's
mark.
not. They wouldn't bury it that far.
Are
It's
you
weird.
happy now?
Word is so strange.
How
Oh,
about now?
it's so much more
Oh, you did it. Oh,
Do
you
you
did
like
it.
what you're
Whatever
seeing
that
now?
was, it worked.
professional.
How about now?
Yeah, it looks great.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
much better.
All
Thank
right.
you.
So I say working with recruiters, the different kinds, and what I think of today's job market, and then me opining on what motivates hiring managers and what does not motivate hiring to. Also, cover letters and thank you letters. I have opinions, I have insights, but I don't necessarily claim to be right, and I don't claim to have all the answers. So
I have
tell
a
me what you'd
question,
like to talk about.
Andrew. I have a
Go
very fine question for you, I think.
ahead.
Is the current state of affairs permanent or is it going to end?
It's going to end. Everything changes in our wonderful market. Um, I
When?
am going to make this go small, excuse me, so I can see myself. Okay. No, this has been going on. My experience is that recruiting technical writers has flatlined for about the last 2 years. I see postings. I don't believe they are universally real. I think they're more a matter of companies updating their candidate databases and harvesting resumes and having no intention of actually hiring. But it always comes back, and we will look back at this time of the tech industry sine wave of fear and greed and realized that this was when the next Google or Facebook or you name it was born. And they weren't hiring tech writers at the time, but they were building teams that would take over the universe. And if we'd only known, if we'd only been in the right place at the right time, we could have founders stalk at the next world killer. There are venture capitalists who are investing, certainly now that interest rates are lower and it's cheaper to borrow money than it used to be, but they're not hiring tech writers yet. My experience is that the tech doc hiring typically trails engineering hiring by at least 6 months. So even if a company had a full staff of engineers for whatever product they wanted to deliver, it would be 6 months before they actually were serious about hiring a tech writer. That's just been my experience over and over and again. And you and I have been through many cycles. And we wish we'd been there when a Google or a Facebook or an NVIDIA was founded, but we weren't, and we respond to the aftermath of those companies launching and changing the world. So I am confident that hiring will pick up. I am confident that they will continue asking for very unrealistic skills. They will start saying, we want you to create all your content with ChatGPT or something similar, or we want you to robotically create data content, or we want you to do this or that or the other. That isn't possible today. And they need to be reminded that it's not possible, but they need to be shown that you are interested and have applied some time and intelligence to researching where you'd start solving those kinds of problems with those kinds of tools. In the last hiring cycle, it was, can you code? Can you speak Python? Can you speak JavaScript? Can you speak peer-to-peer with our engineers who code in these languages? And if you have no interest in doing so, and you've never taken or even looked at a Python class or a JavaScript class or a Perl class or whatever it is, then they don't talk with you. But if you've begun and can talk about it for 5 minutes, you get attention. And literally, that's all you have to be able to do. Don't have to be a master at this stuff. You just need to be curious and sufficiently motivated to have taken some initiative.
So what are the new areas that you have to show some interest in now?
You read more job descriptions than I do.
I've stopped reading them.
Okay. Well,
just
those who read job,
somebody to come and call me up and say, I want you to work for me.
okay. Well, I applaud you, and that's likely the way to stay sane. I get candidates sending me job descriptions that ask for experience with large language models, LLMs. I get candidates saying, how am I ever going to get this experience? Or I need somebody who can customize a content library, or I need somebody who can create a chat bot. Now, unless you work for a large company, you'll never have had the chance to create a chat bot. But if you do some hunting to say, what are the first steps in creating a chat bot, or has it been done before? There are resources out there. Very often not associated with STC, but associated with instead with write the docs or with several other kind of, what do I want to call them? Luminaries in our business who assemble experts and interview them. It's possible to
Like
sound
the
intelligent.
content wrangler.
I'm thinking content wrangler, and I'm thinking if it's data related, we can all think of people who have much more experience and much more demand for data tools and delivery. Sometimes it's people who've worked in different industries, for example, defense. You know, they want S3000D kind of experience. I hope never to have a job description that requires S3000D. I truly don't. It's not my universe. I'm ethically at odds with that world.
Excuse me, was that S3000D?
Yep,
What is that?
Google it. It's kind of the next generation of mil-spec.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Thank you.
But
I have a question.
there are parallel universes,
Mhm.
and they wax and wane in their demand. My experience has been the software development world pays best by far and has best job stability. So that doesn't mean you're going to retire from any of these companies, unless you've already retired, in which case you're probably working contract. But I can't tell you where the next kind of hot technology for technical writers will be. I'd love to believe it's AI. I'd love to believe it's fintech, but I could be completely wrong. And it could be bioinformatics. It could be medical devices. It could be something that's off my radar.
I have a question about something I saw on your about resumes.
Yes.
And it says things not to do. Could you elaborate on that?
Sure. Well, there's a, you do not want to disclose marital status. You don't want to hint at age, and you don't want to give them any kinds of clues that you have experience that's not going to be relevant to them. So among the technical writing community, there are many people who've been in this game 3 decades or more who think that all 3 decades of that experience is relevant, and they're wrong. And clients and hiring teams do not want to pay for all 3 decades, or even more than the last 5 or 7 years, which they consider much more relevant.
So that's a guideline of like the last 10 years at most. Okay.
I've seen the same guideline, and I champion that. If there are things from your past that are directly applicable to the industry you're serving, for example, once upon a time you worked at a bank and this job is fintech, or once upon a time you worked, for a database company and this is a database application. Now you haven't done it for 10 years, but you know what SQL stands for, and you know how databases work, and you can keep up with that pace of change. Then list it, but not in detail. I recommend company, deliverable, audience, preferably all in one line. If you want to put in dates, great. But if you don't, just say, put it under the category of prior experience and give them something to start a conversation about. The resume does not have to be encyclopedic. In fact, it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
And when they see an encyclopedic resume, they figure you didn't read our job description, or you can't read our mind about what matters to us.
Yeah, especially because, as you say, they don't read cover letters. You know,
They don't read them.
yeah, because
they don't read cover letters, and they don't read resumes until the applicant tracking system has determined that you are worthy of a read. And that's the universe where the first bullet there. You got to catch their attention with terms that they understand, either extracted from the job description or acronyms that they are curious about.
Yeah.
If it's application tracking system compatible resume, you want to exclude tables, and you want to be careful not to include subjective descriptions of yourself. Highly motivated and very, industrious and quality minded, and yeah, I'll leave that for somebody else to assess.
Right, because traditionally, the thing was to, put it in the cover letter, exactly why you fit, give them what they need, but
Sure.
sounds like not with all these applicant tracking systems out there.
I think you have to do even more thinking for them these days. And I recommend an applicant tracking system compatible resume that lists terms from the job description and topics from the job description in the summary section, right at the top. So you may be God's gift to databases, but if someone's coming along and asking you to document graphic software, tell them about graphic software. Tell them about what you can or have done, because that gets them interested in you because you've shown interest in them. Have I answered the question?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Things have changed, these ATSs.
ATSs, they're a necessary evil. We live in a database-driven world where resume portals are black holes, and that I never expect to change. One of the joys of independent recruiting is I can get a resume to a hiring team and demand a response like, hey, I've spent multiple hours prepping this candidate and explaining your needs and your priorities and fine-tuning their resume where needed for your opportunity. The least you can do is tell me what, how that flies on your end. And they may give me a couple sentences worth of feedback, which I will share.
Thank you.
Andrew, I have a quick anecdote, relates to something you said a couple minutes ago. A few years back, I got a job description for a job at Microsoft, and they said they want minimum of this many years to that many year, or maximum of that many years experience in the field, and they were very firm, no more experience than this.
Yep, that tells you they don't want to pay for more.
Exactly.
And that's sad, but I think we've all seen that prices, or at least asking prices, have come down a lot in the last 2 years. I would say 20% or more. If you made 160, you shouldn't be insulted if you're offered 140. That's just to think to yourself, gee, I made 160 2 years ago. Don't say that out loud because they won't. They will think you're out of touch, and you may deserve what you made and more, but they can't pay it, and it's a reflection of the fact that they're not earning it themselves.
So there's all this use of AI in different ways going on, and
Mhm.
I have a hard time seeing how to leverage that, how to actually uh, where are the tech writing jobs in that relate to these new uses? Like Salesforce, for example, is replacing human customer service people with AI models that know everything about their customers' past behavior and so forth, and can very patiently and calmly answer all the questions, knowing all the specific details about those customers. And that sounds like a great thing to do, but where does the tech writing come in that?
Several places. First of all, the content needs to be curated for a specific kind of audience, and that means it needs to be structured. And whether that's data or something similar to structure that content, it also needs to be kept accurate and complete. So you're tagging data for a certain kind of audience.
Well, it
Often
doesn't
it's
sound like they're actually doing that. It sounds like what they're doing is
well, certainly they're doing
large language models and
yes.
and their database of their existing database of customer stuff, and using AI techniques to pull stuff out of there and answer questions that customers have without any processing, any pre-processing.
That's the end result, but it doesn't happen with the wave of a wand. It takes a tech writer to curate that content and tag it and prepare it, and the tech writer's deliverable is data content or structured content that can be queried by the AI engine.
Well, with Salesforce, for example, all of the content comes from the customers. They're using Salesforce to manage their own sales activities, and they're putting the information in there in a structured way.
Are you saying that the customer is creating all the content and the tech writer doesn't touch it?
Yeah, like that.
Okay. Well, that's pretty rare. I would say that's not possible for most companies. There's a there are a couple leading edge companies delivering AI accessible content for exactly the situation you just described. Those take Titanic sized budgets. And most companies aren't in a position to do that today. Maybe that's a goal for them, but a fast growing software development company that's smaller than Salesforce is going to value your contribution toward getting there. So maybe there's no longer a role for a traditional technical writer at a Salesforce, but I remember when Adobe fired all its tech writers and recalibrate or recast them as interaction. They were customer interaction specialists. Does anybody else remember this? Where people who wrote reference documentation and procedural documentation for Adobe products all lost their tech writer title and became customer interaction experts. And they spent their days writing replies to frequently asked questions. And when a tech support person would get such a query, they would point to a blurb written by a tech writer to answer that piece of information. Where did that content originate? It originated in the reference documentation, but it was extracted by the tech writer and reformulated for just-in-time use. And that was 15 years ago. So smaller companies with less raw content need both the raw content and the tagging, structuring role if they're ever going to be AI compatible. Because you can't just say, oh, make the whole internet my large language model and let customers query it. That's going to result in no end of problems, hallucinations, and worse. You have to control the large language model that you build from, and that's where the tech writer comes in.
So you see data as being important.
I'm saying structured content is the only way to, and I'm not saying data because I don't care for it much myself, but it is having a new wave of relevance for companies that are creating structured content to be queried by a chatbot.
Okay.
So if you can get experience creating chatbots or creating content that is accessible by chatbots, you become much more marketable than somebody who just creates raw content. My humble opinion. Does anyone have a different one? Silence.
Apparently no one disagrees with you.
Okay. More questions, please.
I got a question for you.
Yes. Hi,
So
Rose.
I always write thank you letters, and I don't think it's ever made a difference. Sometimes I feel like they're like cover letters, and I keep turning off my video. Have you ever seen a thank you letter make a difference?
I have.
Mm.
I have noticed that, at least because I operate differently from most candidate company interactions. I'm the middle person, and I kind of demand attention. But a resume that doesn't get followed up with a thank you note to say, I enjoyed speaking with you about this topic, and oh, by the way, I forgot to mention, this potentially relevant fact or set of facts, or here's the updated contact information for somebody who can give you, a reference to back me up when I told you I was able to deliver XYZ. Just make it relevant. Just say, I valued your time. I'm interested. This information may help you make a more qualified or more intelligent choice. And I promise not to beg. these kinds of interactions, even if just scanned, will remind them who you are. And if they suddenly turn off hiring for 3 months and then come back and say, who did we talk to before? And they look in their email log and there's your name with a thank you letter. They're going to start there. You can say, oh yes, Rose, she wrote us back a grateful sounding note, adding to the information that we learned during our interview. We thought, hey, she's potentially compatible with the team. Let's see if she's still available. That would save us a great deal of time. So it's not the clincher, but not writing one in this market where it's hiring managers, it's under a hiring manager's control at every step, it looks arrogant not to write a thank you letter. It's like, oh yeah, you owed me that conversation. You owed me that interview. You owed me consideration. Don't do that. Don't be that proud. So
Well,
not a promise, not a promise that it will be that it will make the difference,
yeah.
but it certainly won't hurt. And cover letters, my comment here is that they're typically ignored by a hiring team unless the applicant tracking system or the job description rather asks for a cover letter. In which case, the right thing to do is give them a paragraph or two that addresses their job description and how you meet the credentials. I often find it very useful to say, yeah, you asked for XYZ and I don't have XYZ. However, here is what I've learned about it. Here's why I think I'd be interested in learning more. So to ignore chunks of the job description in a cover note or potentially also in a resume in this market where, again, where the candidate has little control, it's a bad look.
Do you think this is, how would you rank the current market as compared to other tough markets? Is it the toughest? Is it the third toughest? Is it same as other ones?
So I went through the nightmare that followed 2001. I went through the nightmare that was 2008. And I went through the nightmare that was 2022. This feels very much like 2001. It's like, yeah, we had a decade during which we minted money, people, and we could throw a dart and get a job. And then the money dried up and changed toward tech for good or bad reasons. But we are at that stage where venture capitalists are being much more selective. They are not fueling companies anywhere near the rate they used to. Most people didn't know or don't know that a venture capitalist firm that invests in a tech firm has to have a return on investment within a decade, or they have to return the invested money. And if you think that through, that explains a lot of the cycles. They have more or less told most of their portfolio companies that aren't already profitable, we're not giving you any more. You make do with what you've got. If money becomes cheaper and we think you've got a market by the tail, we'll put more money into it. Otherwise, start looking for a buyer. And when they start looking for a buyer, they're typically looking at private equity firms. And those who've been through this kind of cycle before know that when a private equity firm goes looking for a technology company, they're looking for the intellectual property. They're not looking for the doc. They don't care about the tech writer, salespeople, support people, and a few other low on the totem pole professionals. get cut very, very quickly. So if a private equity firm is involved and you still have a job, start looking, because you won't for long. Mergers and acquisitions, typically they will keep the jobs that are in the cheaper neighborhoods, and they will cut the jobs that are in the expensive neighborhoods. That works against the Silicon Valley tribe. Just is. We have had a very good run for a very long time. It would be nice to have another good run for another long time, but we're competing globally now, and we are nowhere near the value for money that they can buy in Eastern Europe. And sometimes we lose to people who call themselves technical communicators in India or even in China. If a development team is in those locations, a VP of engineering can very easily say, I want my tech writers co-located with my engineers. Where are my engineers? Oh, they're in India. Oh, they're in China. Oh, they're in Budapest. That's where I want my doc people. And that's the end of the conversation. They don't understand why not, so they do. Anybody have a different experience?
No, I pretty much agree. Both mergers and private equity definitely, like looking for cost savings, and what a better way to, have the same number of people but pay them like 3 or 4 times less than to offshore them. I mean, it's classic.
That's what I see, and there's a very real pain there. It's undeserved, but in a global context, this is normal and becoming more so.
Yeah. Andrew, I have a question about different thing that you haven't touched on yet. It's about portfolio, and I guess, like writing samples is something that you are expected to give, but is there value in investing into like, like building your own site that illustrates your different type of, content? And I just, it sounds like a job of its own, because it's such an effort, and I don't know if it's really pays off. What's your experience?
My experience is that portfolios are mandatory, and you have to make them very accessible from a LinkedIn profile or from your resume or both. In this era of docs as code authoring, where you're using Markdown or restructured text and Git and a static site generator to generate the HTML that the people read, if you can't do that or make it obvious that you can do it in your portfolio, you're at a disadvantage. So if you look at my synergistic.com portfolios.html page, I have some fairly unusual and some challenging perspectives on portfolios, on where to get that content, how to alter it so that it's not disclosing intellectual property. But if you don't make the effort to keep track of what you've done that fills certain niches, whether that's procedural documentation or reference documentation or API stuff or user assistance related material, and get the client's blessing or on the exact content you created or something similar where you've doctored it a bit, what I call neutered it, and then put it in a GitHub page, you've made the hiring manager's job so much more difficult, and they have such a short attention span. So my all cap statement here: do not make hiring teams think. Don't make them ask for the writing samples. If those aren't available, the assumption they'll make is that you haven't done it, that you might want to do it, that you could do it if they took enough time to teach you, But if you haven't done it, I think we all know how tech responds to people who need training. They move to the next option because they don't train. Maybe they don't want to train. Maybe they can't train. Maybe they're too embarrassed to acknowledge that they don't understand it well enough themselves and are physically unable to train. But it is up to the tech writer to display subject matter awareness and audience awareness. And that is done through your portfolio.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, it's really not even, it's non-negotiable.
Hi, I noticed I don't you can have a personal GitHub page.
Yes.
I had never heard of anyone using that, but that's
it's that is very common, especially among software industry tech writers, the engineering audience set, where you've heard of Doc Says Code. So,
yeah.
So GitHub is the right place to put that. Everybody seems to be developing their code and storing it in the repos on GitHub, despite the fact that Microsoft owns GitHub. If you can do that too, they'll invariably be something better, snazzier, more secure than GitHub someday. But that's the default location for your content.
Not the LinkedIn profile, because that's where I have most
Yeah,
of my.
and you can connect it from your LinkedIn profile, but if you look at the contact info link from your LinkedIn profile, it only lets you have a couple of URLs there. So I recommend the first of those URLs points to your portfolio site.
Okay. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you for asking. Does anyone want to talk about negotiation?
What do you have to say about negotiation?
Well, per the speaker's notes, so I've got a bunch of links. I think that tech writers do a pretty poor job of determining what matters most to a hiring team and casting themselves as creators of revenue rather than quality content that basically boils down to being a cost center. You don't want to look like you're costing more money than they would be comfortable spending. That, to me, if you're face to face with a hiring manager, first of all, congratulations, but you need to know before that conversation starts what matters most to them, or have a very efficient way of finding out in the first couple of minutes. Are you more concerned about completeness or accuracy, or the fact that I don't need any engineering help to research and write this content, autonomy, prioritize these for me. Tell me about the best candidate you ever heard about or worked with for this kind of job. That often lets you understand what they value that is beyond, it refocuses the job description, which way too often is a kitchen sink. Ask them hard questions about how would you feel if given the choice between an encyclopedic answer to a specific configuration, product configuration question, or having more code examples, or having me spend my time on a different priority. How would you how would you have me focus, or have the right candidate focus, so that you get some real world answers and you can address those and say, here's how I can solve your problems. Or, gee, that's not been my focus to date, but I think I can make it my focus. Here's how, here's why. If you think the person interviewing you is often a guy, but if you think that person hasn't read your resume, isn't really paying attention to your candidacy, add some urgency. People fight with me about this. I get to do it as an independent recruiter representing a candidate that is obviously has been noticed. I can say, this person is interviewing at other places. They're expecting an offer of X, in the X range from this competing company. If you're serious, have a serious conversation now and let them know that you are potentially interested in bidding. If the hiring manager says something completely off the wall that asks for skills you don't have, but believe you would be able to develop and provide quickly without too much grief on the client's part, on the hiring manager's part, offer a sample of how you would go, an example of how you go about doing that. So let's say I want a chatbot and I've never done a chatbot and I really don't have clue one about how to create a chatbot, but I will get back to you by end of day with a page and a half of how I would go about creating a chatbot. I don't know anything more than you've told me, hiring manager, about what your content looks like today, but I'll make some assumptions and I'll tell you what I would need in order to get to the next step. And here's how I'll make you look good. It shows initiative. It shows ability to solve problems and not simply be a sponge for what they choose to share. You're collaborating and you are creating solutions when they very often don't have clue one themselves. So they're overwhelmed. They need somebody to solve this problem. They've identified a problem for you. At least take a couple steps back in their direction by telling them how you would solve that problem. I think that's a winning strategy. That's
Yeah.
If someone says, yeah, go ahead, do that for me, regardless of what I end up doing, I will be impressed and I will continue the conversation if I possibly can. And then there's always the don't provide a first number. Don't volunteer a number for compensation.
So you started this discussion of negotiation by contrasting being a cost sink or contributing to the bottom line. And I know all the usual arguments about how we all contribute to the bottom line, but they all kind of ring a little hollow to me, and I'm not sure I could make them and keep a straight face.
Okay. Well, you don't have to keep a straight face if you put it in your resume. And what I recommend there is quantify your impact wherever possible. If you save a company a bunch of time, so you've been told, just got hired and they want to do the next major release in 3 weeks, and you look at what you've got to work with and it's going to take any mere mortal 3 months, and you deliver in 3 weeks, even if it's something you're proud of and you would prefer to forget, talk about your ability to deliver. If they used to have 2 people doing your job, you save them the difference between what those people cost and what you cost. Say that. If they have customer deals dependent on a certain document coming together or a document getting overhauled, collaborated to close a $5 million deal with my contribution. They know what that means, that you were doing your job, but you also were paying attention to the dollar impact. And they can turn, the hiring manager, the publications manager typically will turn around to their management and say, look what he did, she did, what they got done. This number you can take to the CTO or to the CFO and say, this is the value of the resource we're contemplating hiring. So stop pretending it's just a writer. Now, you could put that in print and you never have to do it with a straight face because they read it or they didn't read it, but you've addressed the implicit question of where's the value add? Where is the payoff for hiring me? Very often, your product manager is your best friend for actual facts about what kind of dollar value a release had, or what kind of cost they were incurring per week of development that you helped save them.
I would have at my age, Andrew, my value added is wisdom and judgment, and I suspect that's very hard to sell.
I will tell you that gets translated as expensive and opinionated, as in difficult to negotiate with. So I wouldn't lead with that if I were your recruiter. I would say, Richard will save you time. Richard will save you money. Richard has traveled the waterfront multiple times. He will advise you. If you decide to ignore his advice, he'll obey. But if you let him help you, you can stay out of court, you can stay profitable, you can not waste time on things that ultimately don't matter. That's how I would sell you and your wisdom and your judgment. But if I'm dealing with somebody who's never managed tech writers before, has just been told, you're managing tech writer today, and along comes Richard, that's an intimidating resume. That is a challenge. To deal with an expert who's done this for 40 years, when I've done it for 4 months, I don't want to fight. I don't want an argument. I want to be made to look good.
This kind of relates to something that's tangential, but I've been dipping into a book called I forget the number, I think 48 Laws of Power. That's about, power. But the number one rule was don't outshine the boss.
I agree.
And it was about people that had tried to do things that, where they were an underling and they thought they were impressing the boss. And all they did was make the leader, and all they did was make the leader very nervous that they had somebody that was this capable underneath them.
Sure.
And they wound up getting rid of these guys. He's got the book, hold it up there. And if you've had years of experience and you got a 26-year-old hiring you,
yeah, you are a threat.
Yeah, you're a threat. you're an intimidation he doesn't need, you know?
And you don't have to be. I mean,
Yeah,
again, you can have those conversations privately. You can give advice, written or otherwise, to say, I'm concerned that your strategy is leading this direction and will waste effort. I'll do what you tell me, but if you want to hear details of my concerns, let's have that conversation privately.
yeah.
And my interest is in making you look good so that you so that you get promoted and I get to work with somebody who actually cares.
Yeah. Yeah, that was the corollary to this law of power, was that you push power to the leader. You don't make the leader think that you're trying to replace them or that you're smarter than they are, or that,
Bingo.
you know, but you
It's,
always, you know, and you're watching it, say, with this campaign that we got going right now, is that Kamala Harris kept thanking, you know, referring to Biden's policies, but pushing, we're doing Biden's policy. We're doing, at least up until the point where she, finally he stepped aside. Now she doesn't have to do that. But while he was still running, uh, she made sure people knew she was the vice president, not the president.
indeed. And she was an excellent champion of the boss.
That's right. That's what I'm
I
saying.
understand what my boss wants. I understand that my job is to support and facilitate and achieve success
That's what I'm doing. Yeah.
on that person's behalf.
I was going to say that's something Jack Molisani said when he spoke a few months ago. He said, if you want to get promoted, try to get your boss promoted.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
I thought it was really insightful. And I'm like, why haven't I heard that before?
Yeah. Yeah.
I would underscore that.
The trick is to be on the right coattails. Yeah.
Well, also to just instead of trying to look good, make somebody else look good.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think a corollary there is don't get yourself promoted to management unless you really want a one-way trip out of the company.
Yeah.
Because in our business, it's up and out.
Yeah.
Unless you want to stay as an individual contributor, in which case, once you're in management, your viability is very limited because you become expensive and you aren't as tied to individual deliverables.
Yeah.
And when the pie starts to shrink, your job goes away.
Yeah.
So you think managers are more susceptible than?
Oh, I know they are. I don't know a happy pubs manager, and I haven't for 25 years.
In tech, just in general.
I've never met a happy pubs manager. I mean, they look happy. One day things aren't that bad, but you check back in a couple of months and they're being squeezed by senior management. They're being squeezed by their direct reports.
Yeah.
And they don't control a budget, haven't typically for 20 years. That money is being controlled by a CFO. Theirs is a very, very tough job.
Yeah.
So unless your next step is leaving the company and consulting, be careful about leaving the ranks of the independent contributor.
Yes.
Individual contributor, excuse me.
I've just seen plenty of individual contributors let go too, though. So I don't know if any.
Well, yeah.
If the pie is shrinking that much, then individual contributors get slaughtered as well. But the managers go first.
Okay. Did you think that's as a rule in general in companies? Yeah.
Yeah.
I just went through this with my wife. She thought she had a really good chance of being laid off, and she really wanted to be laid off because she actually wanted to retire. But if she just retired, she'd have like a package like this, and if she got laid off, she'd have a package like this. And she had started as just another scientist, and by the time she got laid off, which she did get laid off, she was a senior director. And she thought she was so happy to be that because she thought it increased her chances of getting laid off.
It's
Yeah, I can easily see it. I mean, even outside of tech communication, I was just thinking of the little car repair shop where I take my car to be serviced. If things start crunching, I mean, they really need guys that can change tires, but they could do away with the guy that schedules the guys that change the tires.
bingo,
You know,
bingo. So there's a risk to straying far from the production line for actually getting the work done and staying current with the technology involved. That's where you're most valuable.
Yeah.
So yes, it's one way to get promoted, but you have to, if you are promoted, you have to have exceptional political and interpersonal skills, which frankly, as a recruiter who sees many different people, writers and non, tech writers typically don't have.
Unless you're Andrea
They're
Ames or
shy.
something like that.
Say again?
Unless you're Andrea Ames.
Yeah, Andrea Ames will recast herself as a solver of business problems. And yet she served in the trenches for a very long time at IBM.
Yeah.
And learned how to walk the walk. But most technical writers would prefer to be left alone to write, or
Yeah.
to think, or to edit. And managers don't get that privilege. They're
Yeah.
always interacting, they're always under stress, and they have very little control over what comes at them. So it's not the solution that makes most technical communicators happy.
Yeah.
So I opined on what makes managers, hiring teams respond to a resume, because implicit in this I never get a response to my resume dilemma is, why not? Why don't people respond when I apply to a job? Specific, rare, and provable technical skills, they matter most. It's sad to say, but writing skills and years of professional experience, and in most cases your location, matter not at all. In fact, they can be a liability. So you don't want to stress, I've got 20 years in the business, because the implication is 15 of those years are not relevant. But you will end up paying me for them because I listed them in my resume. So don't put skills in a resume that you do not expect to be paid for. Writing samples that address the needs of audiences very similar to the hiring team's needs. They're not going to use their imagination. If you say, I wrote for Python software developers, and they've got a bunch of Python software developers in their audience mix, their ears perk up and they say, wow, this person is worth talking to for that reason and that reason only, if could be. If the person understands something about their market, if they've worked in fintech before and this is a fintech job, if this is if this is an analytics company, or if this is a networking company or a security software company, and you've done that, you get noticed. Merely saying, I'm a good writer and I learn on the job, and I've got good references, yawn. That's not going to make them, that's all very subjective. They're not going to respond. Sorry. Also, many years of listening through the ears of clients to candidates interviews, when a candidate says, I can learn on the job, that almost always gets turned against them as a self-defeating promise, because implied is, I don't know yet. And if I can't learn on the job, it's your problem because you've paid for my time. So show them how you've learned on the job.
There's an opportunity when you're talking about past jobs to say, almost in passing, yeah, I started at that place and I had no idea how to do it, but I learned on the job and it took me a week.
Yep. Or I taught myself, or I do something
Give
other
an
than I
example, don't
asked my
just say it's
buddy.
possible.
Yeah. You want to look autonomous. So teaching yourself or figuring things out and maybe getting a little help from the subject matter expert, that's fine. But asking a subject matter expert for the meaning of life, like what does this product do and why should I care and how does it compare with this competition, that's not okay typically, because that reflects a lack of initiative on your part. Again, highly opinionated, but fairly consistently true in my experience. More questions, please.
I still want to know when this is going to end.
When is the depression going to end?
That means this meeting.
When's the
You can
meeting
stop the
gonna end?
recording anytime, my friend.
No, this is fun.
No, I really mean it. I mean, this lull has gone on longer than a lot of previous lulls, it seems to me.
True, but then the boom prior to it
Yeah.
lasted
I mean,
an absurd length of time too. It kept going and up and going. And I mean, Richard, you and I we started where most tech writers would be over the moon earning six figures.
yeah.
And now for people of your caliber, if somebody's offered less than 200, there better be a damn good reason.
Yeah, well, so far, I haven't received
No.
any offers over or under 200
No, I
for
understand,
quite a while.
but you get my drift.
Yeah.
That's the logical next
Yeah.
price point, given what you've contributed and earned.
Yeah, well, maybe somebody will come along and
Yeah.
need that, or maybe I'll just get tired of thinking about it and do something else.
Um, people say, what do I do in order to stay engaged with business? And I've begun saying, take anything and just take it off your resume the moment you get something better.
Yeah.
Never stop looking, but take something, even if it's an insulting price. It's better to work than wait. And I mean, a year ago or so, it became law for all job postings to list prices. And some prices are pathetically low, and others are, oh, yes, and you can make up to 350K. In which universe?
Yeah, right.
And so I don't trust posted prices.
Yeah.
I don't think you have much leverage with the agency recruiters that you see, spamming people saying your resume looks like a perfect fit for this job and that pays $20 an hour.
Yeah.
You're not going to have much leverage with them. But if the job is a halfway decent fit and you want to continue showing experience and continue using skills, no one is going to blame you for a moment for quitting that job and taking something that pays much better. They know they got you cheap. They know it won't last.
Yeah.
So if it's good for morale, if it's good for your health, if it gets you employment benefits or even the pretense of benefits, take something so that you have momentum. You are much, much more marketable when you're working than when you're not.
Yeah. True enough.
So I'm very sympathetic with your dilemma, Richard. Every day I show up at my desk and I say, will I make some cold calls today? Or shall I just wait for the right people to call and demonstrate that they're ready for help, to be helped? Most of the time I choose to wait for the people who are ready to be helped rather than selling my services, hoping that I can make a difference to somebody who's treating me like a commodity.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very fortunate, partly for having worked at Oracle in the boom years and partly for being thrifty, that I don't have to beg for a recruiting role. And I'm grateful for that. And I think that reflects in my reputation. Like I'm not going to beg a candidate, and I'm not going to beg a client for the opportunity to help them. I can wait them out and I can play the long game.
Yeah. Sounds good. All right.
It's a privilege. It's not something that everyone has. Does anyone know Chuck Martin, tech writer?
Yeah, of course we know Chuck Martin.
Okay, so he wrote me earlier today, and he kind of he said, "I miss you, Andrew." Basically, and people who've taken over from you are he used a four-letter expletive, and I explained to him, and I'll read this from my email. All these agencies are bottom-feeding vendors to managed services providers. Managed services providers are the big agencies that kind of coordinate bidders when there's a contract opening or a staff opening. Minimal prioritized information, meaning you don't get a prioritized job description, you get a laundry list. No room for pragmatic negotiation with an actual hiring manager who can make decisions. No option to stage anything other than a meat market. I can't compete with armies of lemmings. I hope you concur that I shouldn't try. Out of respect for my reputation, I must outweight the craziness and instead look forward to opportunities to collaborate with funded, decisive hiring teams that recognize how foolish today's candidate herding process has become. So we have insanity out there for HR people who know nothing other than more resumes means I look like I'm doing my job. The model of bidding to sub vendors who in turn use their LinkedIn recruiter subscriptions to spam the world, they think they're helping the hiring managers. What's happening is the hiring managers are completely out of their minds with desperation. They're not getting quality candidates. They're not they're not able to fill opportunities, even if those opportunities were real, because they're snowed with crap.
Well, that's very cheerful view of things.
Yeah, it's not better for the hiring managers, and you do not want to trade places with them, but trust me there.
Yeah. All right, Andrew. Well, I don't know. Are there other questions? Or if there's people here who are just waiting for the recording to go off so they can ask their real questions, we can we can turn off the recording.
Okay, I will happily answer off the record if asked.
I think I'll turn off the recording now. I think we've recorded enough.